How you doing, Coaster?
Great, Jack. Always great talking with you, especially revolving around baseball. And think back to our My American Legion days when we first met. Who'd have thought that 30-some years now we're celebrating 25 years of RedHawks baseball? So,
I mean, really, right?
It's amazing.
When you were in high school, and I was young once calling a Legion game, going, "Boy, this kid can hit."
And you were still working at Q98.
I was back. Yeah, I was back at like the old channel there doing rock radio, and I see that we're in a room now, and you're represented here. Zach Penpraise, I just mentioned Zach. There's a jersey behind us over there. And does it come flushing back, or are you one of those athletes and pros that don't want to see that just yet? You're not that far removed from playing, so you don't really want to see the history yet.
No, I love seeing the nostalgia of RedHawks baseball or Major League Baseball. It's like when I look back to 1996, 97, 98, 99, the 4 years I played, I look at the names of like Chad Akers and John and I know this is hard to believe, but I put them at the same level as Chase Utley and Jimmy Rollins and Cole Hamels. Obviously, the world doesn't know them as much as, like a Major League superstar. But for me, when I played, Darryl Motley was essentially Chase Utley to me. Johnny Knott. I mean, if you're a fan in 1996 and the way Radio Rick would announce his name and the fans would get into it and all that stuff, it's pretty incredible to think back in those days. Once again, Johnny Knott, Chad Akers, the list goes on. Justin Fletchock. The names, I remember just fighting to try to get on the team in 1996.
Right.
I remember the first day when I was signed and I wasn't supposed to make the team. I was basically on this version of the show with Roger Degerman in those days.
Right.
And I drove around my job. I drove around and delivered computers all day, and I listened to the Roger Degerman that show every day. And so when I was on that show, I felt like a superstar. And now here we are, you and me talking.
Here we are.
But I mean, so it was like, you look at how far we've all come since then. It's pretty amazing how far RedHawks baseball has come, and couldn't be happier to be a part of the team again the last 2 seasons and moving forward. It's I think we always knew that I was going to be back in a RedHawks uniform at some point in some regard. So it's being here this coming up here for the 25th season, it's definitely a great thing.
We are broadcasting live from Newman Outdoor Field, and we'll have you, and you might almost have to eat that mic a little bit more, Chris, because people want to hear you on that. Chad will do that for you, too. Just put it in there. Matt has been a grounds crew. You've been on the grounds crew. You have been a season ticket holder as a small child with your parents, and now you're the general manager of this team.
There's a lot of full circles going on around here, but yeah, I mean, I have vivid memories of opening day at Jack Williams.
Yeah.
You know,
a lot of people, that could be a little trivia question. It wasn't, they didn't, and Newman wasn't Newman then either.
No, but I mean, the nest at that point, and looking back at, watching Coste play at that point, I was a catcher. I'm watching this guy going, well, maybe if I do that, and knowing it's eventually going to lead into Post 2 baseball. And it's a really weird full circle sort of situation this year.
It's great. Chris Coste, it is strange, and it shouldn't be strange. We, on a weekly basis, we shouldn't be shocked. I'm from Williston, North Dakota. Phil Jackson was from Williston, and I didn't really appreciate that until, he was coaching Michael Jordan, and like a bell went off going, this guy grew up in the same little town in North Dakota and didn't really, look back at it. You can look at Lute Olson and Dale Brown and all these names that have gotten. So we've had these. Did you ever, Chris, when you were with the Phillies, stop and think for a second, just allow yourself a second, hotel room, bus ride after a game going, a couple of years ago I was in independent baseball playing in. Did that ever, or did you not, was not a conscious thing at the time that you were with the Phillies?
No, almost on a daily basis, I thought of things like that. The amount of times when I'd go to a new ballpark or a ballpark for the first time. We were talking about Dodger Stadium, and I mean, the first time I went to Dodger Stadium, I went and sat out in the bullpen and looked at the ballpark from a different angle. Fenway Park, I made sure that I hit in batting practice. I hit some line drives up against that, that Green Monster. There wasn't a day, even in my 4th and 5th year. And the reason why is I knew it wasn't going to last forever. I was already pretty old when I got to the major league, so I made sure it never became normal. at the same time, as much as I respected my teammates and my opponents, and I was facing John Smoltz, future Hall of Famer Greg Maddux, and so on and so forth, homered off of both of those guys, by the way.
I would have brought that up if Chris wouldn't have.
In my head, I was going, there's something
Tom
common
Glavine, too.
about
I
this.
can't leave
Tommy,
Tom Glavine
you
out.
homered against Glavine,
True, yeah.
Smoltz, and Maddox?
Yeah, so for me, I made sure I never let the life become normal. And so every day I treated it like it was my first day in the major leagues. It kept me motivated, excited. And just almost as important, it made me appreciate the paychecks every time I got a paycheck, too, because that's pretty cool, especially with the amount of money floating around baseball these days.
Well, think about that. Now, I think Dan Michaels sent a group email to Derek and me and Chase and some of the people when Strasburg's contract dropped, and he broke it down per game, I think, or per start. It was like $1 million per start or $20,000 every pitch. So when you start breaking down these big numbers, you're not opposed, certainly, of guys making that money, I'd imagine, Chris, because if someone's willing to pay, certainly you're willing to earn. I think most people would probably have that theory. You didn't make what Rollins made or what Ryan Howard made, but you made a lot compared to what you were making for the RedHawks, unless, Matt, some of the books were – I mean, those were – what were you making? Can you tell us what you were making for the RedHawks in your first year?
$700 a month.
A month.
$700 a month. Before taxes.
So when that was taxed and you cashed that, like $500?
Yeah, I think it was direct deposit even back in those days at some point. But but for me, I felt like a millionaire, and that's how I would describe it to people when I got paid, even at $700 a month, $350 a paycheck before taxes.
Right.
To get paid anything to play baseball, especially the way baseball was perceived with the RedHawks that first year. Matt talked about Jack Williams. That was an amazing environment, whether it was the preseason in those first couple weeks, and then we moved into here before it was Newman. It was just the nest. And playing games here in front of a sellout crowd, it was to get paid to do that was pretty amazing. But, with the amount of money going around baseball nowadays, how much money does Major League Baseball take in? 15, 20 billion a year. Someone's got to make some money.
Someone has to.
If a guy like a Garrett Cole is, right now the top guy, or one of the, say, top 5 guys in an industry that generates that much money, he deserves to be paid incredible amounts of money for that year. Now, the 9 years, you could debate that. The amount of money per year, I would debate with anybody that he is in fact worth it for this coming up year, if he stays healthy,
sure,
things like that. Now, 9 years, that's a major question mark, but someone was going to do it. The Yankees were going to do it. They can afford to do it. They did it with Sabathia. It was groundbreaking back then, and then Sabathia opted out and got even more money after like his second or third year. So I would argue that Garrett Cole, Steven Strasburg, they are in fact worth that money for that particular year. But when you get to the end of that contract, that's where the big risk comes in.
And the rub is you're maybe not getting them unless there's a 9-year or 7-year, right? Because someone else is going to do that. So you have to extend. That's the rub, isn't it? That's what the agent, when Scott Boras is sitting there with Garrett Cole and he's got an Angels offer and a Yankees offer and all that, yeah, they're looking at the dollars, I'm assuming, Chris, but they're also looking at those years. That's the guaranteed part. And that money's guaranteed.
Yeah, guaranteed. And, on a side note, I was really hoping he was going to go to Anaheim or go to the Angels. And the reason why is the baseball world does, in fact, know who Mike Trout is, but Mike Trout needs to play in the playoffs. He needs to be in the World Series, and I know Anthony Rendon went there, but I think Garrett Cole would have had a bigger impact on the Angels than Anthony Rendon, and I'm one of Anthony Rendon's biggest fans, but another good position player is not enough for the Angels. They needed a Garrett Cole. If the Dodgers can pay that kind of money, obviously the Angels can as well. Mike Trout needs to be in the playoffs.
Matt, you guys have in a smaller scale because you're capped and you have X number of dollars to work with, and Chris and Jim Bennett and all Anthony Rand's bit, all these guys that are involved in this. That's also on a much smaller scale what you guys have to go through when you build teams or retain players, right?
Yeah, it's a lot less zeros.
The decimal point's a little bit in.
Decimal point's a little bit to the side, but we would love to have everybody that we want when you're working under a salary cap and the roster rules that we have with minimum amount of rookies and maximum amount of veterans. That's always going to play into it. Major League Baseball doesn't have to worry about that, but I think that's also a big factor in why our league is so competitive to each other, is that it's forcing every team, not just who has the deepest pockets, to try to build a team every year.
We're coming to you from Newman Outdoor Field. Before we break, I'm going to throw throw a little tease out there. Derek just showed me. I know that this is one of the things that we're talking about at the winter meetings out in San Diego, and one of them was that MLB was pushing for rules that requires pitchers to face at least 3 batters or finish a half inning, I think is the way that they put that. I believe that that has now been adopted, so that's going on. We'll touch base on that. The Houston Astros, a former team of yours, Chris, stealing signs, and not that that's a bad thing at all in baseball, as you probably, it's been going on since, forever. But in the way that they were doing it, using technology and then signaling through some type of banging on a can or what have you about location or off speed or fastball. And I don't think that, Derek, we haven't seen the results in that, but we have seen the results on whether the baseballs were juiced in 2019. Derek, could you read the final results?
A study commissioned by Major League Baseball maintains that the baseballs weren't juiced during the record-setting 2019
You are
regular
not
season.
the father.
You are not the father, no. Luke, I am your father. They were just flying farther.
They're just flying farther. Chris, 4 scientists said they're just flying farther.
For every person that says that hitter didn't know he hit a home run and it goes 20 rows deep, I think Rob Manfred said, or not, a baseball analyst said that the other day, like Tim Kirchin or someone said, there's too many cases of a guy hitting a ball and he didn't even know it was gone. It goes 20 rows deep. I would say for every one of those, there was a guy who thought he hit it 20 rows deep,
That's
and it
right.
didn't even get to the warning track.
Eddie Rosario was like 10 of them.
Yeah. So
That's a good point.
So I think it evens out. I remember the home run derby with Juan Gonzalez. There's a famous line from Bob Costas.
My God.
The balls are juiced and the players are juiced too. Remember that line?
Yep, I remember that line.
So we're talking back to the early 90s.
Yep.
There has not been a year in baseball where people haven't been screaming the ball's juiced. It's been
This time around,
literally, and I don't use literally
right.
very lightly.
I know you don't.
Literally every year the ball's juiced.
This year we heard because we started hearing the seam explanation. Wasn't it the seam explanation?
Seams are tight,
The
right?
seams
And
were
I can
this
believe
or-
some of that. And the reason why I say it, because as a college coach, our conference switched baseballs about 3 or 4 years ago from a Rawlings to a Wilson. The Wilson ball was the same size ball. The seams were noticeably smaller, and the power numbers throughout our conference for that 2-year period went through the roof. We led the nation in slugging that particular year.
Because we're talking about resistance here, right? Chris?
And the St. John's coach had a study done on the balls. They went, I think, like 7 or 8% further, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's significant in baseball. So think about for every 300 feet, you get an extra 21 feet. So if the seams are, in fact, a little bit lower, it will create the ball to go a little bit further, a little bit tighter, less drag,
less
things
drag.
like that. And also we found when we used a lower seam ball was the ball tended to move. You'd think a higher seam ball, the ball would move more,
Sure.
but it allows a pitcher to get a better grip with higher seams. But the ball, if you know how to control the ball, a good changeup, a nasty breaking ball, things like that, the lower seam tended to move more for pitchers if you knew how to pitch.
Is baseball? Everybody okay with baseball? The Houston Astro thing, I think, raised a potential alarming. That potentially was not integrity shattering for the game, because baseball survives strikes and scandals, and it's gonna bounce. Baseball's going.
When the results of that officially come out, please have me back, because I'll have a million thoughts. But
I know you will.
I'll save it for when, because I don't want to make any major comments until
Right.
we have the exact results. Here's what they were or were not doing. I have my beliefs on what they were doing because it's not a surprise. But before I throw the Astros under the bus, which I would love to do if they in fact are cheating, and it would not be a surprise if they were. But I want to hear the exact results before we make a lot of crazy comments.
You do agree, though, that the tipping location from just a general player to player would not be against.
Oh, it's encouraged a lot of times.
Right.
Yeah, like with the Phillies, there are plenty of times where runner on second base looking at the catcher giving things away, whether it's signs or location.
If you're foolish enough to show me,
absolutely,
right?
Yep, absolutely. And the best who I ever played with at that kind of stuff was Chase Utley. He was amazing, and because he was so amazing at it, he assumed everybody else could do it too, which they couldn't. But he was amazing at it. So we had there was times in the playoffs or even at the end of the year where against the Yankees especially, where we had to give multiple signs with no one on base, and I fought it tooth and nail. I'm like, what are they going to do? But it was like Chase Utley was so good at picking up stuff on opponents in a legal way that he just assumed everyone else was as well. Now, this electronic stuff is a whole
totally different story.
Ball of wax, yeah.
They say Steve Little, Ron Gardner credited him as the bench coach all the time. So Chase Utley's the next bench coach because that's kind of the guy who does it all, right? Just looks at tendencies, and that's kind of their job sometimes. Or?
Yep, and you can pick things up on video. Like, nobody watched more video than Chase Utley, but the amount of times where the camera would kind of creep into the dugout and he'd be up against that bat rack just staring out like in this glazed look out at the pitcher, and he was studying for any little edge that he could get in a legal way. And he'd watch video too, like not live video, but like, highlights, or if John Smoltz was tipping a pitch, Chase Utley was going to find it before the first inning ended.
When you homered off Smoltz, did you know the pitch that was coming?
No, it was a guess, but you still got to hit it. I guessed slider on that particular pitch.
You guessed right.
It was probably not a smart guess because normally his slider, he just happened to throw the one bad slider in his entire career. So
you took it out of the park.
Yeah, it wasn't. And the problem with guessing, though, is sometimes you guess right and you take advantage of it. It makes you want to guess more often, and over time, guessing just doesn't.
I know Chris Coste didn't fear. I'm sure you didn't fear anything when you played because you're confident. But Randy Johnson would put a lot of fear into people. You ever face a pitcher that had that? Bob Gibson, Maury would tell you stories about if you're digging, he would yell, "You just keep digging, buddy." If you're digging in at home plate. Did you fear anybody in that vein?
Not in the major leagues. The only time I was ever like that way when I stepped to the plate was right out here in 2008 against Isla Borders when she pitched for Duluth. 60 Minutes was in the stands, and 5 weeks later I'm watching myself on Sunday at 7 p.m. striking out to a girl. It was great.
That's right. Boy, you talk about the history. Next year is 25th anniversary for RedHawks. Derek, you remember that whole that was a wild scene that transcended just a baseball game. I remember being in Duluth before you guys took the field and walking in kind of the back area of that Wade Stadium, and Isla was there pacing because she couldn't dress in the locker room, and then it was the whole thing, and this is a guy's sport, and what's a woman doing this, and that was back
1998. Well, she played before that, but 1998 was when she would have pitched against. Did I say 2008? Yeah. I meant 1998. Yeah.
2008 you were playing.
That was World Series.
Yeah, that's right. It was a little different.
Yeah, 1998, which we also won the Northern League title that year too. But it was 1998. It was a little bit later in the year. It was her first official start because she came out of the bullpen and she was fierce. It wasn't that she was this. Obviously big, physically imposing figure, but she was incredibly competitive, and to be honest with you, if there was someone that was going to strike out to a girl and could handle it, it was me.
Right.
I ended up striking out twice actually, but so I was fine with it, but at the same time I didn't want to, because I knew the striking out to a girl wasn't the issue. It was knowing that it was going to be on 60 Minutes, in those days one of the highest rated shows on a Sunday night.
Well, and I remember talking to Knott after that. I think he did too.
She found a few guys, and a lot of guys were topping balls over that were out in front.
But it goes to, and I thought about this a lot when Rick Anderson took over as pitching coach for the Twins, and they were changing speeds all the time. And you talk about Radke and Santana, I mean that's what they were all about. And you talk about guessing, everyone was guessing speeds then, and that's what she was, right? I mean, you're going from normally seeing at the low end 79 to the high end 95, and then all of a sudden you throw a 63 in there, and you're trying to get that timing down.
To Derek's question, would you rather face Randy Johnson 11 times in a season or Greg Maddux once?
I would rather face Greg Maddux.
I thought you'd say the more I see Randy Johnson.
No, the way that Greg Maddux pitched was kind of benefited me. Same with like a Tom Glavine. The Randy Johnsons, the long arm, throw hard, a little bit conveniently wild. When he was younger, he was really wild. As he got better, Cy Young stuff, he had more control, but he was still conveniently wild. I struggle with guys like that. But the Greg Madduxes that I knew were going to be around the strike zone. Now, the Greg Maddux who got 8 inches off the plate, I didn't want to face that guy.
You're down 0-2. You are now struck out. Thanks for stopping by, Coach. Good to see you, buddy.